Nandan Nilekani has said many times that India is going to be the use case capital of the world, and that applies to AI as well.
What lessons can be learned about securing AI in an open source ecosystem there?
One of the things that open source enables us to do is that we can fine tune. We have a lot of freedom in terms of fine tuning models.
Even when open source goes away, there will be other open source to replace the existing open source.
How does open source AI contribute to reducing bias compared to closed models?
In my opinion, bias is not always bad.
Hello everyone, this is Amit Naik, your friendly AI human from AI Media House. Welcome to another episode of AI Talks by AIM, powered by Meta. Today we're going to discuss on how open source AI is shaping the responsible and secure AI. And we have a very esteemed guest today present here. Welcome Alpan, welcome Sourav. Both are one of the elite practitioners in the field and who's been one of the advocates of open source ecosystem and its usage to develop some cutting edge solutions and products there. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi everyone, thank you for inviting me for this conversation. Yes, so I head the AI team at Wadhwani AI. I'm the chief scientist. And Wadhwani AI is a non-profit. We work on AI solutions for social impact for underserved communities across India. And our work is fairly broad in healthcare, in agriculture, and in primary education.
Hi Amit, hi Alpan. Thank you for inviting me. Sourav Banerjee, founder and CTO of United We Care. The domain that we work in is, or our mandate is to work for providing access of mental health services through AI. It's not a replacement of AI therapist. Work very deep into a lot of research like causation, hallucination of AI. Last year, we have about 27 world records in our name. We have filed 12 patents. So, to reach population and to reach population with clinical efficacy is what is our mandate. It's what we are trying to solve.
So let's open the floor by asking one question here, right? So how are you guys, leveraging open source for your, say, responsible and secure AI initiatives there?
We leverage open source models for a lot of the work we do, not just the LLM work, but also the LLM work. As far as the LLM work is concerned, we are doing projects in healthcare, in agriculture, and in primary education that leverages LLMs. Some of which is supported by Meta. One of the things that open source enables us to do is that we can fine tune. We have a lot of freedom in terms of fine tuning models, in terms of adding extra layers on top of models as well, and then retraining from scratch. And we use some of these capabilities. For example, we're working on an oral reading fluency assessment using AI, and this is already deployed across the state of Gujarat, across public schools in the state of Gujarat. And there, initially we have an ASR model that we've locally fine-tuned that's deployed, and that was built on top of AI for Bharat open source models, where we collected student data from across the state, and then using a combination of student data as well as synthetic data that we generated by pseudo-labeling children's voices using Bayes models. We then trained more sophisticated models, and this would not have been possible had the Bayes models not been open sourced. On top of that, what we are now working on is because we understand how students speak across a single state, across all schools in that state. we can now leverage Llama, for example, which is an open source LLM, in order to design content for students, for practice content that is personalized, because we know what that specific student gets wrong. And so we can design practice content for that student. And again, there we would be fine tuning on top of Llama models. So open source is useful across the board. It also helps, in terms of, because, many of these open source models have been trained on data sets that are quite different from the data sets that we encounter. So whereas our solutions are generally deployed in rural areas, in underserved communities, people who don't normally use technology, let alone AI. So it's highly likely that the kind of data these communities contribute is not part of standard training data sets, even though these training data sets are huge and exhaustive. So it's almost imperative for us, in order to prevent bias, that we have to fine tune to those data sets. So, for example, even some of the Indic language models that exist, the open source models, they may do, pick one language, say Marathi. They may do very well on a specific version of Marathi. And that specific version of Marathi is the version of Marathi that exists in these training sets, that probably came from people who are already clued into digitization, right? Who use digital devices all the time. Now, that's a very different version of Marathi than maybe used by people on the ground or in villages in rural areas. So it's almost imperative that if you want to prevent these models from failing or being biased towards urban Marathi, that you have to fine tune and you have to modify on localized data sets.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alpan. Sourav, what is your take on open source and its usage in terms of responsible AI there?
Let me come from a different perspective here. I wrote a paper, the primary author of this paper, that LLMs will always hallucinate and we need to learn to live with it. That's actually the title of the paper, quite popular in the academic community. If that is so, if language models will hallucinate always, and we have figured out few structural ways of language models hallucinating, which is, in training set, it's never complete. In retrieval, there will never be 100% accuracy in the, reliable retrieval of the data. In generation, there is absolutely no reliability that the generation will happen properly. Generation fact checking, again, it's not 100% accurate. If we are living in this era, it is sensible to put your, weights and biases, your training methodology in the public domain for public scrutiny. You can't explain, at least be transparent. There is absolutely no explainability of AI. And all the explainability tools are kind of in a rudimentary form that is in no way close to, production ready. Put it in public domain, put it for public scrutiny, let people decide what they are getting into, rather than a closed boxed approach. Source is the only solution. That's the first one. And I have a very strong opinion on that, even when open source goes away, there will be other open source to replace the existing open source. But the question is not whether it's open source versus closed source. We do know what we are getting into. In that scenario, it's just sensible to get into something that gets into a public scrutiny, like millions of eyeballs across the globe. They look into the code, they see the weights and biases, the inherent errors that which is there. That's number one. Number two, this is also a current research that is in place. Eventually, larger models which has horizontal approach, trying to do everything, trying to explain like Einstein and writing poems like Tagore and then flirting with you. These models will be good at almost everything, great at nothing. So they will not get into the domain specific, how Alpan was telling, like, for urban Marathi versus, the rural Marathi, those realities, they will not be able to get into that. Mental health, the domain that we come from, it's inherently personal. There is nothing generic in mental health, right? So population level training does not help. In our case, we need to take a verticalized approach. And if we need to take a verticalized approach, the most sensible thing that we can do is pick up an open source one, then do the post training on that. We should focus on post training on the existing pre-trained models and then, work with the use case. Third one, with autonomous agents coming into the picture, do not have any way wherein every possible agent data we are comfortable sharing with a company whose primary interest area is to replace us. I mean, we share the data with them. Even then, it's opt-in, opt-out. We do not know, because what we do not know is what we do not know.
Yeah.
All the interim agents, if they are inherent, even on top of the prompts, if you just associate with them, it's very easy to do a GRPO inside and then just replace us very soon. So the trust is the third factor wherein we think in an autonomous agentic basis we need to do that. Sorry, very long answer, but
So yeah, very interesting one. I think you made a solid case in terms of how proprietary or a closed source model kind of doesn't give that flexibility in terms of giving that personalized solution, and also the trust factor you spoke about. Very important there. And also, I think Alpan also was trust in terms of how flexible it is when it comes to adopting open source model there. Very rightly put. Just one quick question here. Uh, like, what do you guys think? Can proprietary, closed AI models, match the level of, scrutiny and, rapid innovation that open source communities drive? Given a lot of examples of late that is happening in terms of the open source, how close they are coming to proprietary closed models in terms of reducing the hallucination, or it can be in terms of deployment of responsible AI use case that. So what are your thoughts? Like, can proprietary AI now match the kind of scrutiny and the rapid innovation that is happening in the open source?
can I answer this question by asking a question back to you?
Sure, yeah.
In mental health, suppose I'm training a bot. Next is, Amit, you have depression.
Yes. Okay.
You will ask, okay, why?
Yeah.
I answer you back, trust me, bro.
Okay.
Who will trust?
No, unless it is personally known. Yeah, I will not trust. Yeah.
You need to have the explainability. If I'm saying you have depression, I better off able to explain that why I say what do I say. That's the first thing.
Got it. Got it.
Yes, I can't explain why do you have depression. The best thing I can do to you is if it's nothing personal, so don't take to them.
No, it's okay.
The best thing I can do is see, you took a PHQ-9 assessment, which is a clinically valid assessment, and this is your score. This is not a diagnosis, but a screening. Because your score is high,
Got it.
you have a high risk of depression, possibly getting into a depression. Why don't you go and talk to a clinician?
Correct.
One do you think is a more sensible approach? First one is a closed source, trust me, bro. Second one is open source, wherein I'm actually showing why did I say what I said.
Makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Alpan, you want to add? Yeah.
Yeah, so very interesting, Saurav. I completely agree with the points that Saurav has raised. I just want to follow up with a couple of things that Saurav you mentioned earlier, as well as Amit, the question you raised. So one is, this whole question of explainability. Totally agree that explainability is not a solved problem in AI. In fact, almost by definition, AI is not explainable. You have these huge black box models. And in fact, there is, even though there is some work in this direction, especially in computer vision, it's not clear that there is a unique explanation for a certain thing that AI does, right? So depending on what explainability method you use, you often get different explanations. And that's what makes it all the more important to at least be transparent, certainly about your training code. If possible, even open source your data that you use to train the model, which I know is a bit of a problem with large language models, given the scale of the data, given certain sensitivities around copyright issues and so on. But I also want to point out the other part of building trust is human in the loop. So the fact that AI is never 100% accurate. With LLMs, there is this whole effort to make sure that they don't hallucinate. But we've known this even in the BC era, the before ChatGPT era, that that AI is never 100% accurate. It makes mistakes. And critical applications like mental health, like clinical applications, you need to have human in the loop curating the AI. So really, human in the loop is probably not a very accurate term. It should be more human in command, right? And AI being used as a tool. So I think that part is also important. The other aspect, sorry, so the question you raised was, are the closed source models sort of going to do better? Now, and I assume you're referring to LLMs again. Nowadays, people just talk about LLM and they don't, they sort of assume that the discussion is around LLMs. But we have a history. AI has a long history, pre-LLM history. And we've seen that open source models in computer vision and other areas have done exceedingly well, and people have built upon them. There's been a lot of work done on top of open source historically, and there's no reason to assume that LLMs will be any different, right?
Correct.
We don't know what people are doing under the hood with closed source LLM models, again, because they are closed source, but we've seen what open source models can do, right? We've seen the recent advances in DeepSeek, R1 and so on. We've seen also some of the problems with that. When I said, when I mentioned, I just want to clarify something I mentioned earlier regarding addiction to open source. What I really meant was, if one gets used to building on open source models that are constructed elsewhere, say outside India, for example, and one can be lulled into thinking that there is no need to build your own sovereign models. Because there are open source models out there, just fine tune them for your use cases and work on them. But the point is that it's also important, I think, for countries to build their own models, just in case certain open source models go away in the future. So that was my limited point.
I missed one point telling last time. There was a paper came last year that the embedding space, the hidden embedding space that we do not understand are actually getting converged. So if you see over probably 8 or 9 more iterations, we will have absolutely identical, outcomes from a closed source model and then our open source model, because there is nothing new that we can do, right? So if things are, on a saturation of convergence in that scenario, there is no reason for anyone to actually go to closed source. But the last point is closed source provides, because hosting an inference even today for language models, and again, we are focusing on language models here, is very expensive. And to have fast token generation and faster response, the larger companies, they provide their closed source ones. The generation, the output is much faster.
Correct.
Open source is not reached at that level. So we have to work a lot, but we need to support open source. That's my limited part.
So now moving on to say the bias and ensuring fairness in the AI product that you build using say open source, right? So how do you ensure, how does open source AI contribute to reducing bias compared to closed models?
I think this question is similar to the previous one. I don't open source by itself magically removes bias.
Okay.
Again, depends on the methodology, the kind of data the model was trained on, and so on. But I think the first step, regardless of whether a model is open source or closed source, or regardless of whether it's an LLM or other type of model, should be to design very, very solid evaluations. So the first thing you have to do is detect bias, right? Even before you go and start attacking it, figure out whether you have bias or not, because bias is a is sort of a very cool thing to say, or a hot thing to say, depending on what you like. But you need to first systematically address the issue of whether you truly have bias in your model, and you can do that by designing good evaluations. Have don't trust aggregate metrics. Create cohorts. Evaluate separately on each cohort of interest. See if there are differences. Do the differences make sense? Or are the differences a result of bias? So these are some of the questions you really need to ask to detect if there's a bias first. And then there are several bias mitigation methods depending on the type of model you use. One method is, of course, fine tuning preferentially on data sets where you believe your model is not doing so well. Various other sort of training time methods as well that you can use. But I think the main issue, it's fine to talk about bias, but the main issue is, first figure out whether you do have systematic biases in your model.
Alpan, can you share a few examples like in your, what are some of the strategies that your company is adopting to ensure, let's say, diverse, inclusive AI development within Wadhwani AI?
Yeah. So again, I'll take a non-LLM example. In LLMs, we've seen hallucinations and the usual types of errors. We've not really seen too many systematic biases, at least in the work that we are doing. But in other areas, yes. So especially in risk prediction models. So we're developing several types of risk prediction models for tuberculosis. And there, we did very systematic evaluations on all kinds of cohorts that could be of clinical or sociological interest. And we found differences in the way the models behaved. Now, some of those differences, then, we actually went and talked to public health professionals and doctors, and some of those differences you could explain clinically and should have been there. Right? So you shouldn't just throw everything under the bias rug. Some of the differences were really model bias. And there we corrected by retraining, by designing appropriate training sets, and also use some bias mitigation techniques that come at the cost of some accuracy, but still it's worth it because of the bias. So that's the other judgment you often have to make, that most of these methods have a bias accuracy trade-off. Are you comfortable with lower accuracy in favor of more fairness? And that's a question you really have to ask use case by use case. You cannot make a generalization here.
Got it.
And so I have two questions. Okay. Have we concluded that bias is bad to start with? Because if we have concluded, then I'll have a completely different opinion. In my opinion, bias is not always bad. Okay. So to exactly start from where Alpan left, and I completely agree with what he said.
Yeah.
First of all, okay, let's do a simple test and ask LLM to generate image of an analog clock wherein time is, say, 6:25. So very simple one. The time is short at 6:25, so the legs will come down. It can't. None of them can. Or Narendra Modi, when he went to Paris summit, he talked about someone writing on left hand and generate the image of it. The answer is not. And why do we see certain things? And I can keep going because I come from healthcare domain. Representation of a certain type of data is problematic, which is because all the clocks during the training set, their time is 10:10. You to generate a clock which is 6:25. It can't. So simple. It can't, because it has not seen the training data set is so biased towards a particular data. Or when we say human being writing, the training data set is so biased towards people writing on their right hand. So much so, Barack Obama being a left-handed person, even Barack Obama writing on his left hand can't be drawn by most of the language models who generate images. Now, if we have a training data which is inherently biased towards certain thing, we introduce another bias, we call it positive bias, to take it back for the accuracy to increase. So as he was telling, what are we looking for? A more accurate solution or
Yeah.
less biased solution, right? So if we look for accuracy, we have to induce bias in the system. So in terms of, I come from healthcare industry,
Yeah.
here we care less about bias, more about accuracy, right? So here the possibility of hallucination is very low. So we, at the expense of inducing certain biases, we call that positive bias in the system to
Yeah.
actually handle the accuracy problem. So there is a trade-off. You cannot ask for both, that I need a system to be accurate and then less biased. The whole internet is filled with hate speeches, misogyny. If the training data, we do not induce a positive bias to remove those things from the data set, someone's bias, right? Probably the developer's bias, or as a community, a societal bias. But whatever way, we put a bias on the data set to train it.
Yeah.
Question now comes, whose bias is the right bias and whose bias is the wrong bias, and who gets to decide that?
And now I think coming to the security aspect through collaboration, right? So uh, how does open source AI contribute more to building secure AI systems? From that aspect, do you guys see any change within your organizations? Like, have you seen any difference in terms of the security aspect of any kind of vulnerabilities? How open source is kind of supporting that? Yeah.
I'll go first, Saurav, just because I have a very short answer. So, with the social in the social sector, where security is security of PII data is huge, right? That's a huge concern. But
Got it.
other than that, security of the models is not a very big concern because we intend to open source all our models, and where possible, we intend to open source all our data sets as well. So that's not a big concern for us. But data, yes, and data, we need to make sure that even though we want to open source our data, we cannot open source PII aspects of our data. There are certain within our organization, we don't ingest. We have a rule, more or less a rule, that we don't ingest PII information into the organization at all, except that in certain cases we have no choice. And there is, for example, we have a computer vision model where we take a video of a baby in the rural home setting, and it tells you the weight. Now, if you blurred out the PII, namely the face of the baby, then the weight estimation is completely thrown off, right? So we can't do that. So we do the next best thing, which is that no human developer looks at the face of the baby. It's only the model that sees it, the training code, and the annotators see it under confidentiality agreements. But so you have certain corner cases like that. But other than that, we don't ingest PII at all.
Coming to the guardrails and then the governance bit and the ethical, I think you already touched upon in terms of when you're explaining about explainability in terms of using open source and building those capabilities there. With AI safety institutes and governance framework emerging globally, right? Every country is looking at this very differently. So how should organizations structure, say, ethical guardrails for open source AI?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. So I don't think there is a one size fits all to this. Ethical guardrails for open source AI. I think to some extent it depends on how your models will be used. The models that you open source. So you cannot say that you cannot provide guarantees in terms of the ethical use of the model when you release it. I mean, you cannot imagine all the ways these models can be used, and of course, you can have some regulation around, some legalese around what kinds of use cases you would want your models to be used for. Regarding AI safety institutes, again, I think without regulatory power and only advisory power, I am at the moment at least a bit skeptical of what these safety institutes can achieve.
Yeah, Saurabh.
So first thing is, we should see AI safety as aviation safety, or 3G, 4G type of thing, not a governmental initiative, but intergovernmental initiative. I'll tell you why. You cannot have a plane flying safely if every government has their own safety norms for aviation sector, right? So all they come together to come to a basic common minimum acceptable framework that is acceptable for all the governments, because the processing, the source, the training, everything is so decentralized in AI that single government jurisdiction cannot solve it. That's my unfortunate prediction, but I keep telling this always. It's the first thing. Second part is more about how we create the guardrails around what is acceptable in a domain and what is not. So, Alpan touched upon a very good thing. It's human machine interaction, human on the loop, human in the loop, human in control. And that is not specific to or generic to the whole ecosystem. So, for medical health, I mean, we are screaming our lungs out to say that it should be an industry wherein human in control, which is AI cannot diagnose, should not diagnose the patient directly, cannot give treatment to the patient directly. It has to be given as a educational tool to the doctor treating clinicians, and they take the decision at the end of the day. But there are few industries wherein it is acceptable. But when it is acceptable that human being, we create a guardrail and things work on that, which is the least basis of how human and machine interact. The point is, I take a open source model and it generates and it hallucinates really bad. I go to court and I say the model, because of the model, my answer is wrong. The model comes and says, well, because of your implementation way of implementation, the answer was wrong. Point is, in terms of jurisdiction, who is responsible? Now, if we make the model makers responsible, it will severely increase the innovation part. No one will try to create a model and put it in the public domain. I put a model in the public domain, then there is a developer who is picking the model, utilizing it and misusing it or do whatever, and then going to the government. It's not right for the model maker. Now, looking at the developer community, they do not have the know-how to create the whole model themselves. They trust a model, and genuinely that was the problem with the model. Then we will penalize the developers because they had trusted that someone in Meta or someone in Google, in their open source process, they had taken correct steps that they had not. The model in itself is wrong. It is hallucinating. In case of wrong generation, who is responsible? Is it the model developer being put in the public domain, or the developer who is taking a model and then implementing a solution? So, and these do not have those easy answers. That we have.
You can go ahead. Yeah.
Very interesting point that Sourav brought up. Just in following that point a bit more,
Yeah.
it comes back to what I said about evaluations. Ultimately, you're using a model for something.
Yeah.
Have you evaluated it properly on that thing before deploying, right?
Okay.
So in that sense, I would put the onus on the final user of the model, that have they evaluated before use, especially if it's made clear to them that AI model should always be evaluated before deploying, right? You have to evaluate in your local context because they're so data dependent. And
Yeah.
to some extent, I think it's like blaming Einstein for the atom bomb, for discovering E equals mc square, which was used for the atom bomb, right? Some people do blame him for it, but I would think that's a bit far-fetched.
Yeah, makes sense. So I know, it's kind of early. Like, are there any global best practices that can make open source AI more secure while maintaining transparency? Like, have you come across any of those things? I think there are a lot of examples going on in terms of which are the global best practices that. So, what are your thoughts on that?
NASSCOM developer guideline, the best. I mean, just to the NASSCOM's developer guideline, NASSCOM is doing wonderful job. We should be proud of that. Like, we always look west. For a change, let the west look at us. We have something incredibly good. So there was a Biden administration guideline on AI, ethical AI, but it was like, okay, you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4. But then tell me, how should I do that? Because problem we all understand, but how do I solve it? The solution is way more difficult than the problem understanding. We all understand the problem. Developer guideline is a guideline which has been given to a developer, which is extremely actionable, as Alpan was telling.
Yeah.
All those things are a part of that guideline. So what you should do, what is the best practice, where are you there? Like, are you a foundation model developer? You are a, user of a foundation model, or you are building your foundation models over and above a pre-trained foundation model, right? So
Correct.
how you position yourself depending on that,
Yeah.
or onus is being defined. So I strongly suggest everyone we should talk about the responsibility guideline given by NASCOM for that purpose, because that's most actionable globally.
That's interesting. I think Saurav made a very valid point in terms of why do we have to, look for best for certain practices, because we are also building it. And case in point here is, I think, the India AI mission, right, which is also focusing very aggressively in terms of citizen-centric applications. When it can be in, in agriculture, climate, and also in terms of healthcare. So all of these, real-time social impact is happening, and we have like India AI mission, which is kind of leading that very positive steps in that direction. I think it's a good initiatives there. I mean, you both are in terms of leading those initiatives and applications in the healthcare and other domain there, and education as well. So I just want to understand, like, how does open source AI help scale responsible AI for real world benefits, like meaningful benefit, and how does it even align with, say, India AI mission in terms of the support from the government, and collaboration, and how does open source fall in that scalability aspect there?
So I think the first part of your question, I think we already addressed to some extent earlier, which is that, just the ability to access models, to fine tune them, to be able to tweak them, and so on. It greatly helps the entire AI ecosystem, right? All the use cases. And, Nandan Nilekani has said many times that India is going to be the use case capital of the world. And that applies to AI as well. There's just the diversity of this country, the diversity of the data sets that exist. It's just mind boggling, right? And so there's a lot we can do with AI. Now, when it comes to responsible, I know people talk about responsible AI in a somewhat abstract and generic context that, independent of application, this is responsible AI. To me, responsible AI includes responsible use of AI. I mean, if you're using AI for some very questionable defense applications, for example, that may not be responsible use, right? On the other hand, if you look at responsible use and especially the use of AI for the development sector, India has been the number one country in the world. I mean, it's been the first country that's emphasized that we want to do AI for social good, right?
Yep.
And it's not just in letter, but also in spirit. I think there's been a lot of emphasis on using data to create ground level impact. And in fact, our organization has this experience over the years. We work very closely with the central government. We have teams deployed within government offices that discover problem statements, that get access to data sets, get access to deployment platforms, and so on. And there's huge push towards deploying AI in order to make a difference on the ground, whether it's in public health, whether it's for farmers, whether it's in education across the country, public schools, and so on. So I think, at least in terms of responsible use of the AI, there is huge push from the Indian government, and of course, it's all enabled by open source. Now, again, I would go beyond the LLM examples. If you look at other areas as well, the space is becoming dominated by foundation models that you can then either use embeddings or fine tune in some way. And so open source becomes a very valuable construct in this whole thing. And then, as we build these use cases in India, use cases that you build in India with Indian data are going to be relevant to the whole world, and certainly relevant to the entire global south. So imagine that we build all these use cases across the country. We open source all the code behind building them. We even open source the models and so on. I mean, that's going to be a great global good. right?
Yep.
And this is all enabled by the whole open source paradigm. So I think this is a no-brainer.
I think we covered almost everything beautifully, and thank you for all those insights and information there. Really, I think the viewers would enjoy the conversation in terms of how open source is used for responsible AI use cases. I think we've answered all the questions they have. So if the viewers have any more question, please put it on the comments. We'll definitely get in touch with Alpan and Saurav to answer them as well. I think that's our time. Thank you, Alpan. Thank you, Saurav. I'll see you guys in the next episode of AI Talks. Until then, take care, guys. Thank you.